Hi, and welcome to the Pride Road Architects podcast. I'm Lisa Raynes, and each episode I'll talk to people who interest me in the world of architecture and business. So join me and fellow lions and lionesses as we explore architecture in the den. So hi everyone and welcome to Architecture in the Den, and today I'm joined by Kwamena Beecham. And so before we go any further, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi guys, my name is Kwamena Beecham. I am an architect. I'm based down in London, and I've had experience pretty much all of the south of England. I did my part 1 in Plymouth, my part 2 in Birmingham City, and my part 3 in Westminster.
Right. Well, thanks for that. And when did you qualify?
So I qualified this March, actually. Yeah,
so
I know.
That's why you let out a little yay when you said you're an architect.
Exactly.
So it looks like it's been quite a long journey for you.
Yes, it has been. I started my part 1 when I was 18, and I'm now 33. So I am in a perfect example of the 7 years not really being 7 years. Although I got married right in the middle of my studying, or my qualification studying, and I'm a father of a daughter. She's 2 now. So life didn't stop for me whilst I was preparing to be an architect.
So how did it affect you? So did you do your part 1s in one go, or did it take longer than three years?
So it took longer than 3 years to do the part 1, and that's something actually I want to touch on a bit later. And I met my now wife at the end of my part 1. She's not an architect, and so we got married after my part 1 and before my part 2. So there was a couple of years in between that. So we got married. Did my part 2. Being married on the part 2 was an interesting experience because we also lived in Gloucestershire, because that's where we were based. So I was commuting to Birmingham. So I was commuting, I was a husband, I was also a student at the same time. So I was doing a lot of, me and the M5 became good friends, doing a lot of switching of hats. And then after I finished part 2, we moved to London. So I'm originally from London. So we moved back. My wife, it was the first time move, and we're now based in the southeast.
Wow. Yeah. So how far's Gloucester to Birmingham?
It's about 70 miles each way.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So it was a tough one because we moved to Gloucester. I moved to Gloucester because my father-in-law wasn't too well. So we made the decision to live closer to my wife's side of the family.
Yeah.
And he had a terminal cancer. And so the decision to move was a good one, and we're glad we did it. But it just meant a few sacrifices. And thankfully, I have a very supportive wife, and she had a very stable NHS job. So that was what was really funding me be able to, drive 70 miles each way, and sort of study in Birmingham. It did really focus the mind a bit.
Yeah. Well, there's expense in traveling.
Yes.
And then on a course like architecture where it's so demanding, were you in college every day?
Every other day I was going up.
Right.
It was a thing where we looked at our sums, and we sort of took the long game. We're like, okay, for this next 5-6 years or so, we're gonna have to be very careful. So we didn't go on holiday. We didn't have things like Sky TV or anything like that. My car was relatively old, but it was quite reliable. And so we were able to make the sums work. Living in Gloucestershire, the rent prices were a lot lower than now. And so it was one of the things where whenever we needed something, it was available. And I mean, even public transport, it was more expensive to go by public transport than to drive. So it became a bit of a no-brainer to going up the motorway every couple of days.
Wow. So it's quite there's a lot of planning involved in that, isn't there? I mean, it's one of the skills that we have as architects, is to be able to problem solve and plan these sorts.
Yeah.
plan life around. I was talking at Liverpool John Moores last night, and we were talking about kind of working, you know, the studying and the long hours culture of studying. But when you've got those real life issues alongside studying, it really does focus the mind.
Yeah, it does, and I think it also highlights a lot of the issues we have within the profession, which are historical. I mean, I'm fully aware traditionally a lot of my cohort and my colleagues, they had parents who were architects or they had family members who were architects. My parents are professionals, but they're not architects. So for me, the first time I experienced architecture properly was on my part one. So I really came in at a deficit. And then you have tutors. I mean, 99% of tutors, I mean, I've done it myself, are great, but you get the 1% who have a view of the world which is not, how should I say it, which is not inclusive of all mindsets and all backgrounds. So although I was able to keep up academically, little things like, okay, so what's a plan? What's an elevation? What's a section? They're saying you should have had experience of this. I said, from where? I came through the education system. So I went to a good school, but they're not teaching architecture in secondary school. They're teaching design technology, physics, maths, art. So how are you going to get these skills? There's an expectation of coming into the profession. You should know how to do these things. And me being myself, I was not stubborn, but I questioned a lot. I said, okay, why? Why is that? That's not fair. Because there are how many people who have a background like myself, or who are smarter, who are not as smart, who have the skills that we need in the profession, but they are being shut up because of financial pressures, because of social pressures, and because they join a school of architecture and it's sort of the Lord of the Flies, where the toughest succeed. I remember when I started, I was one of 7 or 8 black men on the course. I'm myself and another one of the only ones who actually have qualified. They all dropped by the wayside just because.
During their part ones.
Yeah, during the part ones.
Yeah.
During the part ones, and it was a tough learning curve for me for part one. That's why it took me 5 years to do my 3. Because it wasn't even big issues. As things like the first time I had to work during my first years there. Because my parents supported me with how much they could. The course is expensive, and so I ended up missing the pass by 1-2%, and then with the resubmissions, I felt like I was geared up to not necessarily progress, and that's when I really was confronted with a lot of tacit information that you're expected to know. So if you don't know, who's going to tell you? And so I learned the hard way. Okay, you need to ask more questions. You need to be able to be in the rooms where these conversations are happening. And I managed to get through my part one. I met my now wife, and that was a big motivation for me. Seeing, I was like, okay, my life is not just mine anymore. I took my vows seriously. So if my success is hers, so I need to make sure that I'm doing the best I can. I'm looking at all opportunities, and she pushed me every step of the way. But yeah, the part one was a big learning curve, and then the part two, similar things happened where you have it's not far removed from what we've heard about in the Bartlett. I was quite lucky. I went to universities which did not encourage bullying. Like the school was very hot on that, and I enjoyed my part 1, 2, and 3. But there were still influences from external influences who were like, you do not fit this mold that I have of the profession, and they wouldn't explicitly say, or I don't even think they realize it themselves. So hence why I'm not going to name anybody, because they don't know. It's not necessarily it's not like the cartoon villain where they're thinking, aha, this person's going to fail. It's more like you have a different way of seeing life to me, and I don't know how to approach it. And that's a big thing in our profession. That's a massive thing where hopefully now it's changing, but it's not changing quick enough.
Are you well, one of the reasons why I kind of got in touch with you was because I saw that you were standing for the RIBA Council.
Yes.
Are you involved in sort of education, architectural education at all?
I was up until about my part 3, because I decided to sort of step back to focus on that. And I'm actually looking to get back into it. So if anyone hears this and wants me to talk to the young minds, feel free to drop me a message. I'm very much interested in it, because even during my part 2, I took there's a module which was a teaching module. And so I was quite I had a tutor who was who allowed us to sort of figure out our own brief. So I did some drop-in sessions for the part 1 students on Thursday, Friday, when I had a free morning, and added to that, I taught DT and design skills to 6th formers in Wolverhampton. And I sort of looked at, if I teach these secondary schools kids the skills that we take for granted, so there's things like Photoshop, things like just graphics and SketchUp and basic things, how would they perform if I compare them to students in the part 1 who didn't have that experience? And actually, I realized the students who were 3, 4 years older than the secondary school students, they were neck and neck. Because if I gave the secondary school students the same level of skills that I expected of the part 1s, they were able to pick up very quickly. So it was not an issue of you're just not good enough. It was an issue of you're just not smart enough. It was an issue of what have you been exposed to.
Yeah.
And that was something which I then took on when I did some more tutoring during my part 2. So I became a visiting tutor every so often. I had in the back of my mind, these students come from different walks of life. So I want to entice them to go back into that, to look at the rich tapestry of where they come from, instead of, especially being a son and daughter of immigrants, instead of whitewashing your heritage, encouraging to look back at your heritage. Like for myself, my parents come from Ghana. I'm British Ghanaian. The idea of a house is completely different in Ghana than it is to here. Here we have the traditional 2 up, 2 down, front garden, back garden, driveway if you're lucky. In Ghana, West Africa, you have the compound home where the whole family live there. They have their own units within the compound home, but the family is within walls. Whereas in the UK, it's very much mum, dad, 2.5 kids. If the cousins live 10 minutes down the road, you see them on special occasions, but it's not a shared household. And even that is at odds with how we design in this country. But then, especially in a place like where I live near London, a lot of people you're designing for are not necessarily British. So you're trying to put a square peg in a round hole.
Wow, fantastic. So those skills that you're talking about, kind of architecture 101, the kind of basics, shouldn't they be incorporated in the degree course?
They should be, and thankfully they are. At the time I joined, because I started in 2007, way back when, and that was when I saw a lot of the sand, the shift was shifting. So we had tutors who were very much like, we want to teach these skills, and there was a feeling of, the red tape we now come up against in the profession, sort of slowing things down a bit. And you have some tutors who would champion the students for who they are, and others who are like, they're just not good enough because they don't know what they don't know. So yes, those skills were taught, but it was a thing where you've got 150 students, how do you make sure each and every one of them understands? It's not physically possible, knowing how relatively little tenured tutors are paid. It's a tough job.
Yeah. I studied back in the 90s. And so I went to Leeds Poly, that was, and then I went on to Bartlett. So I was a student at the Bartlett that we were talking about.
Yeah.
I'm not going to comment on my experience.
The irony is, being from London, I avoided the London unis because it felt like it was too close to home. I wanted to really experience a different side of the country, because we live in a bubble in the southeast. I mean, I talk to people who've never left London, even though they're perfectly happy, and they say, "Oh, well, that's how it is across the country." I said, "It's not. You leave the M25, and it's not."
I mean, I was the first girl in my family to go to university. And my dad was a builder's merchant. So we're Jewish, and so we're fourth generation immigrants. And so sort of everyone been in, well, my granddad was a builder, my dad was a builder's merchant, and I was the first one to go to uni. So they said to me, my dad said to me, we were going into a recession as I was doing my A-levels. He said, go into architecture. The climate will be fine when you come out of it in 7 years' time, as we hit another dip. Seems to be a regular occurrence.
Yeah.
And I did my degree in Leeds, just got into Leeds Poly, and then I really wanted to go down to London to do my part twos, and my dad said to me, because he was funding me, he was like, if you're going to London, it has to be UCL.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. Fortunate, and I got offers from all of the London unis, and I chose UCL, the Bartlett, and had a challenging experience.
Yeah. I think thankfully the times are changing, but I don't like the idea of suffering as a badge of honor, because I remember during part 1 and part 2, having a conversation with colleagues saying, well, part 2 especially, because I traveling 70 miles a day, I couldn't afford to pull all-nighters and then safely get to uni. I had to make sure I'm in bed by a decent hour, so I've got to make sure the day before is a structured day. So I never came in and said, I've worked all night on this. I was like, well, I'm fresh as a daisy because I've been on the road for an hour and a half, 2 hours. I printed everything the day before, but I've got the same level of work. So why are we at fashion glorifying the struggle? It shouldn't be a struggle. It should be.
We were talking about this last night. It was a discussion on well-being in architecture, and we had 2 tutors from Liverpool University and one from Liverpool John Moores, and they were talking about badge of honor. The language around it is still venerating these long, this long hours work culture, badge of honor, but I think it's about learning those time constraints. If you were going back now to teach someone who doesn't necessarily have those time constraints, how would you suggest to, a year 1 or a year 2 student to set up some boundaries?
It's funny you say that, because I actually have had this conversation over the years many times with students. I say you look at your day as valuable to you. And I use an analogy. When I moved house a couple of years ago, I decided to do it myself, and so rented a van, got everything moved. And my dad, being the accountant that he is like, okay, you've saved the money on movers, but how much did the van cost you, and how much is your time worth? And then I sort of did a rough calculation. Actually, I spent more money because I value my time. So I say to them, okay, of the days you have, of that 24 hours you have in the day, you're sleeping, let's say you want to sleep 12 of them or be resting for 12 of them. That leaves you with 12 hours. Of that 12 hours, how much do you want to spend eating, or how much do you want to spend relaxing, or how much do you want to spend not working? So you start deducting those hours, and you realize you've got roughly 8 hours of the day. Of that 8 hours, how long are you spending on social media? Even just picking up your phone to scroll quickly at a message, that takes time. So if you start being quite structured with what you're doing with the time, you realize actually you can get a lot done in eight hours. I make sure when I come to the office, I'm working as hard as I can for that time, so that when I leave on time, I don't feel guilty. I mean, there are days where you can't avoid it. There's deadlines, there's pushes, things change. Those are not the norm; they're the anomaly. And what I disagree with is when you are constantly working 12-hour, 13, 14-hour days, your health deteriorates, and the people around you struggle as well. I mean, this week I've had some deadlines, and I haven't been able to put my daughter to bed, and I was home on time yesterday, and she was literally fizzing, jumping at the walls because she actually got to see me of an evening. Now that is my motivation. So to go to the question, how do you tell them? You just say you've got to look at what your priorities are. At this moment, your priorities are studying. So you need to make sure that you leave the university with a good degree so that you can do the things you want to do. I'm now at the point in my career where I can do what I choose to do in my career. I don't have to necessarily follow a path if I choose not to. And that's because I've spent years studying to get to this point. Whereas it's easy to, when you start, you're sort of looking at this big hill of minimum 7 years, and you're like, oh, I want to do this and this, but I have to wait this time. And sort of say to them, you've got to structure your time, and you've got to just keep methodically working and looking for the joy in everything you do.
Love it. I think I will extract that out. That's a nice little tip on time management. Thank you very much. So why on earth did you put yourself up for our IBA Council?
Because I felt like for a while I was looking in at sort of gilded castle with RIBA, even though there's a lot of talk on reform, a lot of talk of inclusivity, and everyone I meet from the RIBA is lovely and great conversations. The institution as a whole feels like an old boys club, and I know that name has been thrown around a lot, and things like previous residents, no disrespect to them, it was like you've gone through, you've earned your stripes, you've run a practice, it's got this recognition, now you can run for RIBA president. And for me, I felt I didn't agree with that, and I saw the grassroots movement, which got the new president elected, Moyua, and I actually met him a few times, and I get on really well with him. And so I thought, okay, I don't want to go for president. I feel like I'm not ready for that. It's not something I want to sort of go through so quickly in my career. So I'll go for council. I'll get in to the rooms, and I'll try and understand what's going on and see, okay, can I affect change from the inside rather than throwing stones from the outside? And the little inside, I unfortunately did not get elected, and the two that did were deserving of the position. But I sort of saw, even in the election process, just things like there were no hustings for the council candidates, even though everything was quite transparent. And I know there was a cutoff where you had to be an RIBA member for a certain period of time to vote, or you had to be a certain level to vote. So I had it where in my office, a lot of the part twos, which was a lot of the office, were saying, oh, we want to vote for you because we know you. They came to vote, and they couldn't actually vote for me. They could only vote for student representatives. Now, I'm pretty sure there's reasons behind that and things like that. And even people because a lot of my social circle are not in architecture, deliberately so. I have a lot of friends in architecture, but I also have a life outside of architecture. A lot of my friends think I play The Sims all day. So let's say you drawing with your arts degree. So a lot of them were like, oh, I want to get involved. And they realize that they can't because they're not part of the IBA. So things like that sort of lit a fire under me. And I was like, okay, if I stand, could I be an example? Because in my family, I'm the firstborn. I've got a younger sister. And in a lot of my cousins, I'm on my mum's side, I'm the oldest cousin. And there's a lot of us, and on my dad's side, I'm sort of in the middle. But there's lots of us, and I've always been an example for a lot of people. Because when my parents moved here, they moved here, and a few of their friends moved as well, and family as well. So, but I was the oldest child in that sort of group. I've always been the example, and I've always been aware that you're not aware who's watching you. And I've had a few instances all through my career where I remember previous practice I worked, I did some mentoring with the RIBA, and I had students from UEL. The pandemic sort of cut that short, but whilst we were able to meet in person, my job was just to give them tutorials, and I'd invite them to my office to have the tutorials. And I could see in their eyes, these are guys who are not British heritage, but they were really talented. But seeing me coming to the office I was working at, and coming into the fancy glass meeting rooms that every office has at the ground floor, and like being given a cup of tea by the receptionist and things like that, they were saying, oh wow, like this is attainable, I can do this. And I said to them, yeah, let me be the example to you that even though I've had I've had, not, I wouldn't say I've had a experienced education in architecture, I still made it. And there are people who will have it harder, people who have it easier, but it is possible people who look like us. And so standing for IBA Council, I was like, I want to be that example, because I remember I grew up, it was in the 90s, and Stephen Lawrence, who was training to be an architect, he grew up where I grew up. We lived in the same rough area, and he was 5-6 years older than me. So I remember that was a big shadow for me growing up, like, oh wow, he was going to be an architect. It didn't influence my decision, but it felt like a happy coincidence. I thought, okay, I look at how his legacy was cut short. Could I take that baton on? Not that I'm taking the baton on for him, but could I be an example of someone who's 5 years behind me, or 10 years, or 1 year, or 2 years? And I feel like, yeah, I could.
Amazing. So are you involved in sort of peripheral RIBA bodies at the moment?
Not at the moment. I'm trying to, and I think it's also one thing I'm fully aware of in the profession. Our mental health is really important. So I try not to overload myself. So I'm very much I'm heavily involved with the NLA, the New London Architecture. I'm one of the next gens. So I sort of go to events and things like that, and I talk on panels that they have. But the RIBA, it's one of the things where after the elections, I'm sort of seeing how the dust settles. So if I can get involved.
Yeah, you're going to stand again next year?
I haven't
because they come around really quickly.
They come around very, very quickly, and
yes, they do.
They do, yeah. And I think what was really interesting
strategically about it, if you want to start, it's kind of like, where are you going to be able to get the
exactly? And so, I mean, I know I've got the support of my family, so that's not a hurdle at all. It's just a decision to do it, and also where do I want to go with my career? Because I'm aware IBA Council is not it's not a bit part. I believe if you're going to do something, do it with your whole heart. And what I don't want to do is to get in the way of the day job, because I trained for so long and I enjoy designing buildings. So I actually want to do what I've been training to do. So I haven't made up my mind yet.
Great. Well, we're coming to the end of the conversation. Is there anything you wanted to ask me?
Yes. So with Pride Road, you've got a franchising model.
Yes.
How have you found that working business-wise? Because when there's always a talk of, oh, I'll run my own practice, I want to do it one day, but this is not a new way of doing it. How did you stumble across it?
Well, I set up 2010, so 12 years ago, on my own, out of necessity. So I had been made redundant twice whilst on maternity leave. I've got 3 kids, so it's that work-life balance thing where kind of, unfortunately, life got in the way and work couldn't quite cope with it. So so I was forced to set up, and within a couple of years I'd kind of found a really stable way of working. So I kind of stuck to one sector, which for me is domestic residential. And instead of reinventing the wheel in terms of process, not in terms of design, but in terms of process, I systemized everything. So systemized the way we contacted clients, we responded to clients, and then how we, pulled together fee proposals, different works, responded at different work stages. And so, sorry, I've just had a text message. I was like, what's that? Was life getting in the way? So I systemized everything, and at the same time I was chair of Women in Property Northwest, and then I started to get involved with the RIBA. So I was on the council between 2015 and 2018, and I could see the numbers of sort of women and minorities dropping out of the profession at different touch points. Whilst there was, for women, there was a 50-50 entry at university, but then it dropped off significantly after part ones. And then on qualifying, the numbers at the time were 17.5% on the RIBA. I think they're kind of picking back up, but you still see a big dropout at kind of age 30. And so, I realised that I'd found the right business model that suited having that work-life balance, so you're not doing that 24/7 work. And kind of made it my mission to actually spread the word and use it as good practice. And the way I'm just using the franchise as a mechanism to be able to do that. So the idea of the franchise is that you would buy, you'd set up your own practice, but under the Pride Road umbrella. So you'd operate as Pride Road South East or whatever. You'd have our branding, access to our portfolio. You would, and systems and the way of working and marketing, and use our kind of business skills.
So it sounds really cool.
Yeah, so the idea is it just takes the strain away from setting up, because at university, for me, it was a lot of my contemporaries were like sons of architects. Very few daughters. But at the time, it was a lot of sons of architects. So people had, there were a lot of people who were like, yeah, we'll set up on our, of course I'll go and set up on my own. So, they had the confidence to go and do it. Whereas in reality, kind of, I never saw myself as setting up a practice. I always thought I'd work for other people. So this is that halfway, that kind of third option of being able to step out and set up on your own, but with support.
I think it's good, because it's interesting you said the confidence to set up on your own, because I'm sort of in two camps. Part of me is very maverick, like, I can go and do it. If I decide to do it tomorrow, I can go and do it. But the other half of me is, I've got mortgage to pay for. I've got a roof over our heads to make sure we keep. So obviously it's things are precarious, thankfully, but it's that thing of, well, okay, yes, I'm confident, but I'm also very realistic of what could happen. So it's really interesting to see it. It's been nice to see how it continues to grow.
Thank you very much. Right, I could carry on talking to you, but I'm afraid I need to head off. That was really interesting. We should carry on talking another time.
I'd love that.
Yeah. So, well, thank you very much for joining me. So we've not even talked about where you practice or what you're doing or what's next. If you drop me a bio, and I'll put it in the description. So if anyone wants to follow you or get in contact or find out more, it'll be there. So
that was deliberate. It means you have to come happy back now. I've got a little taste of who I am. Now you have to come back with me potatoes.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me, Lisa Raynes, for Architecture in the Den. If you want to find out about franchising, check out our website, prideroadfranchise.co.uk. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe and leave a review. And do get in touch through your favourite platform if you'd like to be a guest.